Hi there. In this presentation we're going to talk about organic and biochemical compounds. So our key ideas: what is an organic compound, what is a polymer, and what organic compounds are essential to life. So let's start looking at the first question. An organic compound is a covalently bonded compound that contains carbon. So we can throw this into a definition form. An organic compound is a covalently bonded compound that contains carbon, excluding carbonates and oxides. So covalently bonded just means that it's sharing its electrons, and carbonates and oxides are actually something we call polyatomic, and they actually do more of a ionic attraction. So this is just a sharing bond that contains carbon and some other substances. Many ingredients of familiar substances contain carbon, so we've got this category of organic. So we've got aspirin, which contains an organic compound. Amino acids that are found within living organisms are carbon-containing compounds. We've got the polyethylene that's in plastics, citric acid, which you find in fruits, mostly lemons and oranges. So we find these in all kinds of things, and this is just a small sample. So carbon atoms form 4 covalent bonds, or 4 shared bonds, in organic compounds. So we refer to these as hydrocarbons, which is a compound made of only carbon and hydrogen atoms. Hydro being hydrogen, carbon being carbon. We've got a category of organic compounds called alkanes. These are hydrocarbons that contain only single covalent bonds. So things like methane and ethane are alkanes. And you'll notice that the alkanes have an A-N-E ending, like its parent name. So an alkane, like propane here, and the camping stove, is saturated hydrocarbon. Fruits make something called ethene that basically helps ripen the fruit. So if you ever get to ride on a fruit truck sometime, you'll see these big fans that are blowing the air out of the truck, and that's basically blowing out this ethene gas that's produced by fruits that actually causes them to ripen. So if that ethene gas is blown out, then these fruits will take longer to ripen. So notice that we're going from propane, and now we've got a double bond in here, so our ending, or these are called alkenes, so our ending on our compound name is referred to ethene now. Here's an alkyne, which has a triple bond between carbons, and this one specifically is at ethene. It's burned in lamps and welding torches. So looking at alkanes a little bit more, so like propane, for example, has 3 carbons, and then it's bonded to 8 hydrogens. It's all single bonds. Properties of this particular one, or just alkanes in general, they're non-polar, and polar just means that there's an attraction for electrons. Because all the bonds are the same, there's no attraction for electrons over another. Alkanes with the lowest molecular mass are typically gases, so methane, ethane, propane, butane, those are all gases, at least in their natural state. We can compress them down, store them in big tanks, and then they're in a liquid form, but they are under pressure in order to be there. Alkanes with a high molecular mass are solids. Boiling points increase with increasing molecular mass. Alkanes are not very reactive. So we've got some structural and ball and stick models here. So methane is 1 carbon, 4 hydrogens. Ethane is 2 carbons with 6 hydrogens, and then we have butane, and we already talked about propane up here. Butane, 4 carbons, and all these singly bonded hydrogens. So these are just some examples. Arrangements of carbon atoms in alkanes may vary. So the carbon atoms in an alkane with more than 3 carbon atoms can have more than one possible arrangement. Carbon atoms contain chains. They may have branches coming off these chains, and they can even form rings. And then alkane chemical formulas usually follow a certain pattern. So we have Cn and then H2n plus 2, so 2 times whatever number of carbons we have, and then add 2 to that. So here's some 6-carbon alkanes. So all of these have 6 carbons, but you can see that they're considerably different, and they do have different properties. So we've got straight chain alkanes, we've got these branched alkanes, or these double branched, or even they can form these rings as well. So if you ever see the word cyclo in front of it, it means that we've got a organic or a carbon ring. Alkenes are hydrocarbons that have a double bond, carbon-carbon bond, or carbon-carbon double bond. Simplest alkene is ethene, shown here. We then have alcohols, so these are just different groups now. Alcohols have what we call a hydroxyl or an OH group. So if we take out one of the hydrogens and put an OH, we get methanol. So our ending changes a little bit. The alcohols tend to have this suffix or this ending OL. And then alcohol and water molecules do behave similarly because they are polar. So these neighboring molecules tend to be attracted to each other. Some properties about alkenes: they are nonpolar. Alkenes with the lowest molecular mass are gases. Alkenes with high molecular mass are solids, boiling point with weight. And here's some other examples: so ethene, propene, cis-2-butene. So these are just, and then cis is a term, either it's cis or trans. Cis means that these larger carbon groups are on the same side. If we had this as trans, these CH3 groups would be on opposite sides. And then alcohol, there's some properties of alcohols here as well. You're welcome to read through, and then some examples too. And you'll see that you've got an OH coming off somewhere, and then the number typically indicates where those OHs are at. All right, a polymer is a molecule that is a long chain made of similar smaller molecules. So they've got some kind of repeating subunit. Polyethylene or polyethylene. Ethylene, ethene, polyethylene, made from many molecules of ethene. So we call these little smaller molecules monomers, and they build together to make a polymer. So poly meaning many. So ethene is a monomer of that is located in this polyethene. Some polymers are natural and others are artificial. Natural polymers like rubber, starch, protein, and DNA. We've got human-made polymers, plastics, and synthetic fibers. A polymer structure determines its elasticity, so how elastic it can be. Polyethylene is made of long chains. It's flexible but not elastic. We find it in some things like milk jugs. Polymers with connected chains are elastic, so they can stretch like rubber bands. So we can see just a simple image here where we've got this chain. Monomer might be just this CH2, and then add those together to make our polymer chain then. And then different structures. We've got these linear arrangement of these polymer chains, or perhaps there's a side chain that are basically building the rigid, how rigid these polymers to make a really rigid plastic. So these linear ones have more flexibility, so these would be more of a rubber band style, whereas our plastic containers would fall under one of these other categories. Alright, so biochemical compounds. This is kind of an introduction to what you'll be learning more about next year in biology. So what organic compounds are essential to life? We've got biochemicals, which are essential to life. They include carbohydrates, proteins, and DNA. Many carbohydrates are made of glucose. And we can define a carbohydrate as a class of molecules that contain sugar, starch, and fiber. They contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Proteins are complex polymers of amino acids, so just building up amino acids to give us what we call protein. This organic compounds made of one or more chains of amino acids, and is a principal component of all cells. Amino acid is a compound of class of simple organic compounds. It contains a carboxyl group and an amino acid group. They combine to form proteins. Each protein is made of a specific combination of a certain number of amino acids. So here we've got an image of a protein, and these smaller circles on here would be amino acids, so they kind of come together and form this protein. Alright, so DNA is a polymer that stores genetic information. DNA is a very long molecule made of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. It's in the form of paired strands. It has the shape of a twisted ladder, and we refer to this as a double helix. Those cells in your body have a copy of your genetic material in the form of chromosomes made of DNA. So DNA is just the information that cells use to make up the proteins. And I've got a short little video, and we'll be done.
Let's take a closer look at DNA. Here you can see that each strand of a DNA molecule is a long chain of subunits. These subunits are called nucleotides. This close-up diagram shows that a nucleotide is made up of three parts: a sugar, a phosphate group, and a nitrogen base. In DNA, the sugar is deoxyribose.